Turning our attention to project-specific data, this is where you identify, yes, not only do you know what data you need, you place the component and you identify what data comes indigenous, you then fill in the gaps. So this is the fourth step in the four-step process. You now fill in the information that is project-specific or component-specific, thus giving you the complete picture. Now to do this, you can do this upon placement of the door itself. You can do it after the fact, coming back once you've maybe identified or worked out the project specification. You'll want to do this in coordination with the discipline as a whole. So if you're a modeler who's not the discipline lead, you can't do this portion in isolation. You need to work together as a discipline, identify the data requirements based on the specification of the manufacturer notes, and then you can fill it in accordingly. There may be an opportunity beyond the model to fill this information just in at the database level, but the critical thing is it's got to go somewhere and only one time. Similar to with the duct example, once you know the data you need, you identify your data, you model the component, you receive the indigenous data that comes from the BIM authoring tool, and then you fill in what you need. This applies to each and every single component, so we're not going to go through every possible iteration here, but understand if the data is required, you fill it in. If it's not, you don't. And if you don't, you know you have the generic or indigenous data that comes automatically by using a BIM authoring tool, but you will not have the specialty data, which you may or may not need. So when a user is in the BIM authoring tool, they're faced with the choice as they're placing components. Here's the electrical, place electrical, and as I select the component that I need to now decide, do I need to fill out any of this information? And let's say the finish, I need to enter something. But maybe I don't know what it is. So I could put a placeholder to be determined. I could leave it blank, or I can fill in the information now by going and finding it either in the specification or from the discipline lead. Critical is understanding what you need to fill out when. And if there's something that's default that you need to change, so maybe you know that it's 480 volts, you have to change it now. If you forget, you can always come back and change it to the appropriate one after the fact. But know that if this voltage is listed as 120, but it really is not that, somebody downstream can take my component and say, oh, it's 120 volts, and enact a decision based on that. So it's critical that the information, if entered, is correct. Because if it's entered incorrectly, someone else might take it as correct, and it could increase risk on the project or cause issues down the road. Just to iterate the concept of bad data, I brought up a list of all the components I've placed in the model, and I'm selecting single doors. So here you see a list of all the components that I've placed of a common catalog type, and I've just thrown in some bogus data entries. So this obviously is a flag that, hey, this information is incorrect. But what if these were actual pieces of information that looked correct? Somebody beyond the design or somewhere during the design phases or possibly in construction can go and procure the component based on a bogus piece of information, and it'll either not meet the design intent, it could cause permitting issues, it could cause failure in the systems that's being installed, it might not fit, it could cost money. So be very, very careful when placing data in the model. If you don't know, don't put it in. And I think that's the most critical message. Looking at this list, I would rather see these doors up on top with empty data fields, knowing that something either has to be decided or input, than seeing doors filled out with data fields that are incorrect, because then they could be taken for granted. Now, if you know the data, insert the data, so then it can be used downstream. If you don't, do not put in data that is incorrect.